Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
This is an encore presentation of Faith and Sports. Tune in to hear Faith and Sport live Monday afternoons from 2 to 3 right here on Carolina Catholic Radio Charlotte, AM 1270. Well, a good Monday afternoon to you, and welcome to Faith and Sport on the Carolina Catholic Radio Network, AM 1270 WCGC. We're also streaming live online at carolinacatholicradio.org and on the Carolina Catholic Radio app. And I'm joined in the studio today with your host, Dr. John Acquaviva. We hope you're ready for another Monday afternoon of Faith and Sport live on the Carolina Catholic Radio Network. Now, without further ado, your host, Dr. John Acquaviva.
That was great, Chris. Folks, that was Chris Pressler, our producer. Thank you, Chris, for all that you do for the show. Hey, folks, welcome, wherever you're listening. I'm Dr. John Acquaviva. I teach exercise science at Wingate University. I love when I tell people, Chris, that I teach at Wingate University. They look at me a little kind of with a quizzical look on their face, and they go, "You mean Winthrop University?" And then I always say to them, "I know where I work. Winthrop is in South Carolina. We're in North Carolina." Folks, here's what we're going to do today. We have our hit and miss, and joined as most weeks, but not all weeks, is Carlos Herrera. He's going to join us on the phone here in a minute. He's got a hit or miss. I have a hit or a miss, so stay tuned for that in the very first part of the show. We have a really cool guest here today. Her name is Haley Scott DeMaria. She's a former University of Notre Dame swimmer and motivational and Catholic speaker. She'll be joining us on the line here in a few minutes, about 20 minutes after the hour, maybe about 15 minutes after the hour. After the break, after Haley joins us for a few-minute conversation, we're going to do weekend headlines. Then we'll do the quick Q&A with Dr. A. And we have the Cathlete of the Week, as we normally do, brought to us by Brand RPM. Get your branding gear. We have access to over 1 million products, so check them out at brandrpm.com. And the Cathlete of the Week, folks, is a little different. So not that I don't want you to stay tuned for most Catholics of the Week or all Catholics of the Week, but this one's really different. And stay tuned at the end of our show for our Cathlete of the Week. One thing before we go to Carlos for our hit and miss of the week, I want to set up our guest that's going to join us, Haley Scott DeMaria. Let me read. This is off of her book, What Though the Odds, is Haley Scott's Journey of Faith and Triumph. And this is on the back cover, and it reads, when Dick Rosenthal retired as athletic director in 1995, after a lifetime of service to the University of Notre Dame, he was asked about the most memorable moment during his tenure. And without hesitation, the chief of sports at America's most storied university replied, Haley Scott. And she's got a story to tell. She's got a wonderful story to tell. And she mentions it's a journey of, or I mentioned on the book, it says Haley Scott's Journey of Faith and Triumph. And I want you to tune in and listen to this gal and know why exactly she's a motivational and Catholic speaker. She's coming up in a few minutes. But right now, let's go to the phone. We got Carlos Herrera on the phone. Carlos, how you doing, buddy?
Hello, Dr. Acquaviva. How are you?
This is great, man. I'm so glad I have you on the beginning of the show because, you and I are good friends. You and I both love sport. We both love our faith. It's one of the reasons why you're on. In fact, the main reason why you're guest on the show. But it always gives me energy to introduce you in the first couple minutes because you always have a great conversation. Did we not have a great conversation earlier today, though, too?
Oh, yes, we did.
And we'll get a little bit into what we were talking about. But in general, Carlos and I, folks, were chatting about how basically there's loopholes in rules, and especially in Little League sports, even in high school sports, but especially in Little League, they tend to, tweak the rules. They tend to tweak, what a coach can do, what the teams can do, and so forth. And Carlos and I got into a great conversation. We're going to bring part of that back up. And before we get in our conversation with Carlos, again, folks, you're listening to Faith in Sport. And remember, if you have a question for Carlos and I, or when Haley gets on the line, there's two ways that you can chime into the show other than calling in at 704-596-4900. You can email me at faithandsport@wingate.edu, and that's A-N-D in there, faithandsport@wingate.edu. or my Twitter account is j.acquaviva1, and that's the number 1. So if you have a question anytime throughout the show, throw that at us, and I'd love to hear from you folks, especially on what Carlos and I were just mentioning and how sometimes rules can be tweaked and people find loopholes with that. So, Carlos, you've been through a lot there. I want to mention that we can right now call Washington, D.C. the city of champions.
Yes, we can.
The Caps won last year. That was 2018. Yes. Last week, the Nationals won. Yes. And, Carlos, were you aware that the Washington Mystics, the women's WNBA?
Absolutely.
Yeah, there you go.
Definitely aware.
So we can call it in fact, up until 2018, it was a long time, or it probably seems like a long time since you guys won. So congratulations on that. And I know the Nats winning in 7 games was great. We're going to come back to that weekend headline.
Beautiful game, and they really came back, and it was a real trying season. So it was exciting for the town, and for, there's a lot of history there and a lot of firsts for D.C., so we're real excited for the town.
That's awesome. Now, did that have to do with your hit or miss, or is it something completely different?
No, the hit or miss kind of had to do with what we were talking about earlier, loopholes.
Let's hear it.
So there are a variety of things you could obviously do hit or miss. There's just so much content, but I thought this would be a good starter for kind of what we were going to talk about, which is marathon runners.
Okay.
And this new shoe that several marathon runners have broken now some records on.
Yeah.
And the question is, because there's no specifications as to what kind of shoe, but apparently this one shoe, not going to give you who makes it, but is creating an unfair advantage, and there are no rules that specify details about how the shoe is made. So the question is it cheating? Is it a loophole? They're going to have to do something about it. So the context is there's a shoe that is about has more height in the heel than all the other shoes.
Yep.
And apparently the statistic is it changes your time by 3 to 4%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but they think they may be underestimating the actual change.
Wow. Now let me ask you this. Is it a hit or a miss?
So that's a good question. I'm going to say it's a hit because the technology in the shoes have now created a more springy sort of foam, and that also has carbon inside in the actual inlay of the shoe.
Okay.
So it's a hit from the fact that technology is improving our human performance.
Yeah.
And the question is, what do you do with this information and this new technology?
Exactly. And now here's the thing. I don't even know this. I know marathon running to a certain extent, but I take it's like spikes in track and field and that there are some regulations. Is that as far as you understand it as well?
Yeah, I was going to mention as an athlete and, us having worn shoes, right? And,
yep.
and there was another thing where 2 Browns players got fined for wearing, decorative shoes, not like the policy. But, this whole thing about, like, you constantly have to come up with rules, I think, to kind of create maybe it's a fair playing field.
That's right.
And so, but the question is, when do those rules come about? And does somebody's championship have an asterisk now next to it? So, there's just so much from a topic point of view and a moral point of view. Is it right? Is it wrong? And how do you play by the rules, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. In fact, I like your hit here because it's a kind of a round of applause for the people that create shoes. And by the way, I think the maker is Nike. Is that correct? Well, no, hey, we're
sure
not.
Is.
Carlos, we're not sponsored by Adidas or Converse, so we can say Nike on the air. But no, they do deserve a certain amount of congratulations and applause for creating this shoe that actually helps, because 3 or 4% is a huge difference in 26.2 miles. So, yeah, and this is more stuff that comes around the corner. And this leads to something that happened a couple weeks ago. Did you read that it was for the first time somebody broke the 2-hour mark in a marathon?
Yes.
And of course, there's nobody else in the race, and that alone means, and I think he had these shoes on, correct?
Yes,
yeah.
he did.
Okay. So there's something else I want to get to you, but first I want to talk about my hit. Mine was a hit as well, and this is something that's close to your heart, you being a certified soccer coach, and often when you've been on the show, we've talked about soccer. But it was my son Luke's 8 and under soccer team, and in particular, the hit goes out to Coach Thomas, and that's just his first name, but he was the coach of of Luke's team, and I just thought he had a good balance of encouragement and actual coaching from the sideline with these kids that were 8 and under. Of course, for the most part, I think their overall demeanor is fairly mellow, and you've seen it, right? They sometimes, even when they score a goal, and you've seen this before, under 10 years old, I've noticed this with every sport, but in soccer, when a kid scores a goal, often they will look to their parent on the sideline or their coach to see if that was really a good thing. Have you seen?
Love kids sports,
I know.
Especially the young. It's all about just get them to have fun. It really is.
It really is. I think it's so neat. And, of course, their parents going, yeah, and then they get this smile on their face, and it's just a unique experience and a unique kind of look that you'll see on these kids' face.
You can hear the joy of you as a dad when you told me the story, and even right now, how neat it is to see your kid excited about something they accomplished.
It's great.
They don't normally do.
That's right. And one more comment from the game. He said, he got the guys together afterwards. They finished 6-1-1, so it was a really successful, year, an 8-game season. There was no playoffs, which I thought was great. Alicia particularly liked that. My wife, she was like, great, no playoffs, because that can just take such a long time, especially with a game like soccer. But he said after the game, before he gave their individual trophies, and he said, scoring goals is good and even necessary, but I always like the pass that sets up the goal more than the goal. And I thought that was neat for a couple reasons, but the main one was through that comment, he was leaving them with something really important, and that is it's about teamwork, and I like everybody to score a goal, but it's really neat because so much of what they do is about here's how to set up the goal. So I thought that was really neat, and that was definitely my hit. Now, one thing before we go, Carlos, I wanted to run this by you and just see what your thought is. Now, we don't have too much time to talk about this, and I apologize for that at the outset, but we could possibly finish it next week. But here's what happened in my daughter's softball game, all right? So,
I'm with you.
Okay, it's 8 and under as well. So Luke and Claire, they're only 13 months apart, but they both play 8 and under respective leagues. And here's what happened. Chris, I'd like to see if you can hang with this on this because it's kind of convoluted what happened. Okay, in 8 and under softball, there's 3 innings where the girl from the other team pitches to the batters, but if she walks them, in other words, if she pitches 4 balls, the girl doesn't go to first base and walk. The coach for the team at bat comes out and pitches to them. In other words, it encourages hitting because these girls can't throw strikes, right? So if they walk them, so to speak, nobody shows up at first base. The girl stays in the batter's box. The coach runs out to the mound, kind of save time. The catcher throws the ball, and the umpire steps away from behind the plate. And now the coach has 3 pitches to get the ball over the plate. And if any of those balls are hit, then it becomes softball. You field it, try to get the girl off at first, get the girl out at first, I should say, and so forth. However, that's the first 3 innings. In the 4th inning, it becomes coach pitch only. So the pitcher literally stands to the side or behind the coach that's pitching to his team. And at that point, you can score 4 runs total, right? So even if you rally, big rally, whatever. And then in the last inning, the coach pitches again, but now it's unlimited runs can be scored, right? So the other day, it's in this tournament.
If I could interrupt you real quick, John.
Go ahead.
To break it down for the listeners. The first 3, the reason that your coach comes in to pitch for your team is so that you can get practice hitting. And you know,
that's right.
So it's that second difference is that you get a chance to kind of hit, but you're sort of limited. And then at the last one, it's kind of like you're running out of time, so it's whatever you can do, so you try to go full bore and, affect the game right before it ends. And you have also a time constraint.
That's right.
For these, was it 5 innings, 6 innings?
It's 5 innings generally, yeah. So here's what happened last week. And of course, the other reason why it's good for the girls to hit, it allows, walking doesn't help anybody. It really doesn't. It doesn't help the hitter, and it doesn't help the fielders in catching a line drive, catching a pop-up, fielding a ground ball, throwing to first base, whatever the case is. So it's kind of a neat rule, right? It's obviously not, conventional baseball. But last week, Carlos, they're losing 7-0. My daughter's team was. And this is the tournament. So it's a double elimination. They go to the losers bracket. And this is a little caveat, but the other team went 9-1, where Claire's team went 10-0. Their only loss was to Claire's team. So in this second from the last inning, the coach comes out without saying anything to the parents or his players. He throws the ball over the girl's head, way over the girl's head for 3 pitches, and motions to them to run to the dugout because they just struck out, right? And then the next girl comes up, and he throws the ball way over her head, each of the 3 pitches. So she strikes out. Now, remember, when the coach pitches, all 3 are considered strikes, so the best pitch she has to hit, right? If she swings and misses on the last pitch, if she takes it, that's a strikeout. She's out, right? So everybody in the stands is like, what's going on? Like, what's happening here?
Because the pitcher, which is the coach of the batting team,
That's
you
right.
would think he'd be giving them hittable balls so
That's
that
right.
they could hit.
And it took me about 1 or 2 pitches to the first batter, and Alicia, my wife, said to me, "What's he doing?" And all of the parents were, "What's he doing?" And the parent sitting behind me was the daughter of the girl at the plate, and she goes, "John, what is he doing?" And I go, "Oh, I get it." And it took me a pitch or two to understand what he was doing. Carlos, what he was doing was he wanted to get them out because there was only less than 10 minutes left in the inning or left in the game. And once you can't start an inning once that time has expired. So what he was thinking was, even if we have a good inning, the most runs that we can score is 4. But it would take us more than 10 minutes to probably score those runs. In other words, they would run out of time, and it wouldn't matter whether they lost 7-0 or 7-4. It shows up as a loss. So what he wanted to do is end the inning to get to the final inning where they could score infinite amount of runs or just enough to win the game. So they could have won 8-7. Anyway, the parents on the other side were livid. They thought it was cheating. They thought it was unfair. One girl goes, "These girls are 8 years and under. What are you doing?" Right? Good question. And so my question is to you, is this cheating? Is this a loophole? Is this, I know there's a lot of ways we could go with this, but kind of succinctly, what's your thought when you hear this?
What a genius coach.
That's what I told him. But why do you say that?
Strategically, it's fascinating. I mean, he really, within the realm of the rules, he realized that for his team, and this goes back to, do you really try to win? Is winning really the goal? But in reality, it's actually better for his team if they get a chance to really, get a chance to make it competitive. And so, he, unbeknownst to everybody on his team,
that's right.
That's what he was doing.
I thought it was brilliant. In fact, my colleague at Wingate University said, he just goes, "John, it was pretty clever." In fact, I could tell he was like, "I want to, refrain from giving a total comment," because he was absorbing it all, and it was so much. But one of the things he said was, it probably would have been better if he would have told his team, "Girls, I'm going to strike you out purposely so we can get to the next inning to actually have a chance to win this game. I'll explain everything later." But I think it was happening so quick, and I think he just made the decision when he ran out there. Now, here's the caveat, and I'm going to leave you with this. I thought this was so interesting. The other team not only was so livid, they ended up winning the game 7-0, by the way. We went to the next inning. We went out 1-2-3, so there was no danger. Nothing was changed. But the other team clapped 3 or 4 times as hard and as loud as they normally would when the game was over because they won. But part of it was they were frustrated with...
Yeah, they didn't like the tactic.
They didn't like the tactic at all. But here's what was interesting. We found out after the game that the opposing coach said to our coach, he said, "That was brilliant, coach, and I probably would have done the same thing if I was in that same situation." So as bad as he looked and as bad as we looked for kind of supporting it, his parents would have been the parents of his kids would have been in for surprise when he would have said he would have done the same thing. Isn't that interesting?
Very much so.
Fascinating.
It runs in all sorts of sports. Like if you are a defensive team and all you do is stack, like in soccer, just stack everybody in the box, make it real hard for the other team to score, you could say that's an unfair tactic.
That's right.
Right? But there's just so many levels to this. But, people love to win and people hate to lose.
That's right. That's right. And we just want to do it within the rules and do it in a respectful manner. And whatever it's worth, another friend of mine who's a professional as well said, I thought it was a form of cheating. He didn't like the loophole thing. But, Carlos, when you come on next week or the next time you come on, I want to talk about that story I told you about how a soccer team in the Midwest cheated or loopholed this a special rule that was in that rule book for, I think it was 10 and under soccer. But listen, buddy, thanks for joining me for the show.
Great to be a part of the show. Thanks again for having me, Dr. Acquaviva. Have a great show.
I thank you, buddy.
See you next week.
See you, Carlos. That was Carlos Herrera, certified soccer coach from Northern Virginia. He joins us just about every week to do our hit and miss. I think we have Haley DeMaria on the line. Yeah, so she's going to join us here in a minute. If you're just joining us, this is Faith in Sport here on Carolina Catholic Radio. Remember, there's 3 different ways to listen. You can listen via AM 1270, which a lot of you folks are probably doing right now, driving around the Charlotte, North Carolina, South Carolina area. You can listen via the app. Just go to the App Store and download Carolina Catholic Radio Network app, or you can just simply join us by tapping into our website, carolinacatholicradio.org. So let's do this. Let's bring on our next guest. She is Haley DeMaria. She is a wife, a mom. She's a former University of Notre Dame swimmer, and she currently travels the country as a motivational Catholic speaker, and she's here on this show to tell us why. Haley DeMaria, welcome back to the show.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me again.
This is great. Haley, did you have a chance to listen to our previous conversation?
I did hear some of it,
Okay.
yes. That's a pretty hefty topic and certainly a much different story than mine.
Oh, absolutely. Now, okay, so you heard what this coach did on my daughter's Little League softball team, right?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm not setting you up for anything here, because to tell the truth, I didn't really divulge whether I was for or against this, and because I'm kind of on the fence. It was clever. It was a loophole. I thought it was within the boundaries of the rule and so forth. But your instinct when you heard this, him getting the girls out just so they can get to the extra inning where they can score unlimited runs, is this disrespectful to the game?
Remind me again the age
There's
of the girls we're talking about.
8 and under.
Yeah, this is a conversation I have with my own kids and with other parents and my husband all the time. Is coaches and their influence on kids and the way they act and they behave and how powerful that influence can be.
It is.
Was it disrespectful? It wouldn't be what I would want for my children to witness and experience as an athlete.
Got it.
And I think one of the most important things, and I talk about this all the time. And as my own coach said, he coached swimming, but he really taught life. And sports are supposed to be fun, and sports are competitive, and I'm the biggest competitor out there.
That's right.
But I really believe that the most important part of sport is what are the life lessons that we teach our athletes.
No doubt.
And that's probably not a lesson I would have wanted certainly my 8 and under to have experienced.
Got it. And of course, as you know, in every sport, there's all these loopholes. Because Carlos and I were talking off air a couple hours before the show, and we were each bringing up these different stories that we've heard or these different experiences we've had where people just simply, they see the rule, they find a loophole in it, and then they exploit it, and then the administrators can't do anything about it. And sometimes it gets really ugly, and other times not. And before we get into your story, one of the interesting things about swimming, Haley, is it's really difficult to have a loophole in anything, right?
Well, yes. For the most part, there is. There's been rule changes with some of the strokes and how long you can stay underwater, or even the whole. We have the pre-suit issue.
That's right.
The whole suit, the swimsuit issue.
Yep.
You have the pre-suit era and the post-suit era. So the loopholes are more obvious. They're not something that a coach could take advantage of on a whim. But there's controversy and people trying to skirt around everything in any sport.
I guess you're right. There's no exception. It's just it comes in a different form with swimming.
Looks differently, exactly.
Haley, let me ask you this, and I thought this was somebody asked me this a couple years ago. When you were swimming at University of Notre Dame, it was in the early to mid '90s, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and you wore the traditional one piece where I don't know, what do you call that when it kind of the piece comes up to like your hip, and then what do you call that?
It really just high cut. I mean, I did. I swam in a traditional suit. We had paper suits that was just a very fine paper-like material. They were high cut. In my swimming era, it was sort of less is more. It was the smaller and tighter the suit, the faster and the better it was for the race.
And when they went to the Speedo version, my guess is other people made those suits, but when it went down to the guys and gals, like not only mid-thigh, but close to the knee, it seems like that was for buoyancy, but it seems like it would take away from freedom of movement, correct?
Well, not necessarily. It looks restricting, but it really wasn't. But you're absolutely right. It's the buoyancy factor that really played into why the suits were eventually eliminated. It was such a huge advantage. It was less about the swimming and the strokes and more the engineering of how we could make swimmers faster.
Interesting. Well, let's shift gears, Haley. You've joined us to talk about your story, and in particular, what kind of propelled you to write this book, What Though the Odds? Haley Scott's journey of faith and triumph. And so give us a brief overview. My guess is some of our listeners have followed me over from Radio Maria to this show here in the Carolinas, but still most of the people probably have not heard of your story. So give us a brief overview of what drove you to write this book.
Sure. So What Though the Odds, I published in 2008. And it's about an event that happened in 1992. So I think that's the first part of the story. Is it took me a long time to be able to share my story, and I've always believed and learned that I needed to be at a very happy and healthy place in my life to be able to share the story and look back at a very unhappy and unhealthy time, and that was certainly back in 1992. When I was a freshman at the University of Notre Dame and on the women's swim team, and doing well and training and competing, and we were returning from a swim meet in Chicago, and just about 2 miles from the exit to get back to South Bend at Notre Dame, and our bus hit a patch of black ice. Now, I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, so that was a term I'd never heard of before, and our bus literally did a flip turn off the side of the road. We flipped upside down, and we were facing the opposite direction. And this happened shortly after midnight. There's not a whole lot I actually remember from that night. Of course, what I do remember, I remember very clearly. But what I would learn eventually is that I tried to get off the bus myself. I thought I had walked off the bus. I hadn't. I had pulled myself out of a window in the back and would eventually get to a hospital and have no feeling or movement from the waist down. I had broken my back. I shattered 3 vertebrae, T8, 9, and 10. I didn't know it at the time, but unfortunately 2 of my teammates had passed away in the accident. They too were freshmen. I was diagnosed with a broken back. I had 2 emergency surgeries that night in hopes of relieving some sort of pressure off the spinal cord to allow feeling and movement to return. And when that didn't happen, I was given a 48-hour window for any sort of feeling and movement to return if I was to have any chance to walk again. And that 48-hour came and went, and that 48-hour window had passed. And at that point, I had a very kind nurse come in and speak to me and my family, and she said, "Haley, your life has changed. You will not walk. You will not swim again, and you need to accept this for us to be able to help you." And that was a pretty tough thing to hear at 18 years old, and certainly now as a parent of 2 teenagers myself, I can only imagine that it was a lot harder for my parents to hear about their 18-year-old daughter.
Yeah.
But I was pretty determined. I was at a very faith-filled university. I was not Catholic at the time. I was not raised Catholic. So, this whole idea of a community of faith was not something that had been a huge part or an integral part of my life growing up.
Yeah.
But boy, I felt it in such a real way. Really starting from the moment I was in the hospital. Father Malloy, who was the president of Notre Dame at the time, came to see me right after I had gotten out of my first 2 surgeries. And, I'll never forget, he was an athlete himself. He was a basketball player, so a very large presence, both in the holy sense and just in the physical sense. And he walked up to my bedside in the recovery room, and he introduced himself. He said, "Haley, I'm Father Malloy. I'm the president of Notre Dame." And, of course, I knew that, and I remember looking up at him thinking, yes, I know. And he said, "May I pray with you?" And I said to him what I think a lot of non-Catholics would say, and that is, "But I'm not Catholic."
Sure.
And I remember he said to me, "That doesn't matter. Can we still pray?"
Yeah.
And, I'm not sure I was coherent and aware enough at the time to recognize it, but in hindsight, that was the moment I knew I was going to be fine. And it didn't matter whatever physical shape I was going to be in, whether I walked again, whether I swam again. None of that mattered. I was going to be taken care of by this very strong community of faith that was around me, and I was going to be okay. And that was a really powerful comfort to begin this journey of what would be several months in the hospital, several surgeries, several real tricky, life-threatening surgeries, and the journey of relearning to walk again.
Folks, you're listening to Faith in Sport here on Carolina Catholic Radio. I'm Dr. John Acquaviva. Our guest today is Haley Scott DeMaria, former University of Notre Dame swimmer and motivational and Catholic speaker. And she's joined us, and she's talking about what she went through, and it's her experiences discussed in her book, What Though the Odds. Haley, from this day that this nurse said this to you, that was probably around 2 days afterwards. How long was it after she said that you started to have feeling in your legs?
So several days.
Several days, in a couple weeks?
It was about a week after the accident that the toe on my right foot slowly started to move. And thankfully at the time I was in intensive care. I couldn't be moved. My parents really wanted to move me out of state to a different hospital.
Yeah.
But the 48 hours had come and gone. She had told me I would never walk again. The funerals of my teammates were the next day. That was a very dark time. Really as each day passed, the sort of the mood and the ambiance in my room got darker and darker, knowing that this was really what I was having to face. And then it was a few days after she had told me that, so about a week after the accident, that my toes started to move.
How many operations did you endure total?
So I've had 6 total.
Wow. And from the time that now this is part of the, not only did you walk again, and how long was it after the accident till you walked on your own, or maybe with just a little assistance, like maybe with a handrail of sorts?
So, one of the human body is just a fascinating machine.
It
is. And I was in the hospital. I was told I would be in the hospital for up to a year learning to walk again. And I left the hospital in South Bend after 2 months. And I really had to relearn how to walk the way we all do the first time. So I had to learn to roll over on a mat like, we always celebrate, our children when they first flip over for the first time. I had to learn how to do that. And then I had to learn how to get up on my hands and knees and learn how to crawl and go through the process of learning to walk truly as a child would. And that took about 2 months, which was very fast from a medical physical therapy standpoint. It was quite slow for a highly impatient 18-year-old who really just wanted to get out of the hospital. But when I left the hospital in South Bend 2 months later, I was walking at that time with the help of a cane. My balance wasn't so great. My balance still isn't that great. But so it was about 2 months later, and then unfortunately through some pretty significant complications where my spine recollapsed, I had to go back into the hospital a few months later for another month and endure those next 3 surgeries.
Haley, what did the nurse that said to you weren't going to walk again, what did she say as you were going through this process of rehabbing and it looked like that you were going to be able to fully recover, at least close to fully recover?
She celebrated as much as we all did.
Awesome.
And it's really interesting. Anytime there is a nurse in an audience when I speak, I've spoken at several nursing conventions or training sessions, and without exception, if there is a nurse in the audience, she will come up to me afterwards and say, her name was the nurse who gave me the sad news. Her name was Laura, and a nurse in the audience will say to me, "Your nurse Laura did the right thing.
Yeah.
She was doing her job," and I absolutely agree. And so there was no one who celebrated more that her truly correct from a medical standpoint news was incorrect. And really that's there's so many miracles in my story, and that's really one of them. To this day, there is no medical explanation as to why I'm walking. The window had passed. The longer the nerves don't have oxygen, the longer the nerves are dead, so to speak. There's no way to rejuvenate them, and we're a little better off than we are today than we were in 1992. But certainly in 1992, there was no medical explanation as to why my window had closed and then some. Had closed more than double, and my toes and feeling and movement still came back.
Awesome. Folks, you're listening to Faith and Sport here on Carolina Catholic Radio. Our guest today is Haley Scott DeMaria. She is the author of the book, What Though the Odds? She's telling her story, what propelled her to write this book, and it's an accident that happened just a couple miles coming back from a swimming meet in South Bend, Indiana, and she was told she'd never walk again, but here she is a couple months after the accident. She started to eventually crawl and roll over, and eventually, as she'll tell us, she jumped back in the pool. But let's fast forward to not necessarily modern day, but I know you've been a motivational and Catholic speaker for a few years now, and I actually think this is one of the best questions that I can ask folks like you, because you have such a great story and you articulate it so well. But what do you think, or what are you told is the best part of your story, or like what inspires the audience members the most? Is it your perseverance in the rehab? Is it you getting better? Is it the fact that you competed again? And what part of your story is most inspiring to the audience?
So I would say there's probably two that jump out to me. The first one is really a story of hope, and it goes back to why it took me so long to be able to share my story and to write my book. The book is very raw, and there are some really hard emotions in it, and not always favorable in to sort of how I acted and behaved and thought. And I think that's where I needed to be, at a healthy place to be able to share those unhealthy times that I went through. And it's a really hard story to read, and life was really rough for me, not only physically but emotionally.
Yeah.
And yet I consider myself the most blessed person today. And if you met me and you saw me, you would never know what I had experienced. And that is the beauty of the story, is that life can be horrible, and it can be hard, and it can be dark and raw and painful and angry, and life can still be beautiful. And I think that is one of the greatest messages that I know people take from this, because everybody goes through something. Everyone at some point is going to have their own tragedy in their life, whether it's a death, an injury, an accident, a divorce. It is something, and it will affect them, and it will change them, and it will be hard and dark and raw, and all of those emotions that I went through. And so to hear a story and to be able to read about it and listen to it and to hear the awfulness of it and the hardships that I faced, and then to see how beautiful life can be afterwards, that gives anyone hope, no matter what they are going through. And so I love to be able to share that. I love to be able to say to someone, no matter what they're going through, and I hear a lot of people's experiences and stories and their own tragedies, and to be able to say to them, I understand. I know what that feels like. I know how hard it is. But I can tell you, here are the tools, and life can still be good, and life can still be happy and joyous, and it might look differently than you thought it was going to, but it's still really great. And that is one message that I know resonates with really universally across the board. The second one is the power of prayer. And, in Catholic audiences and in any sort of religious setting, I love to be able to share those stories. There are times when I'm speaking, at certain groups where they ask me to leave that out, and so I try to fit it in there without using certain words and get my message across. But, the power of prayer is really powerful, and I have so many just tangible examples of it in my story that I love to be able to share. Certainly one is, a Father Malloy, coming in and not being, just really wanting to pray with me, and what a powerful message, and what a powerful impact that had on me. One of my favorite stories actually takes place many years later. Right before I wrote my book, I was I live here in Annapolis, Maryland. It's a pretty transient town. We have a lot of Navy folks come through, and so about 2007, so right before I wrote my book, I met a young family in our town, and she had kids my children's age, and they had just moved here. And as most Notre Dame alums do, I had a Notre Dame shirt on, and it happened to be a Notre Dame swimming shirt. And she said to me, did you go to Notre Dame? And I said, yes, I did. And she said, did you swim for Notre Dame? And I said, yes, of course, with the Notre Dame swimming shirt on.
Yeah.
And she said to me, were you in the bus accident? And I said, I was. And she said, whatever happened to that girl who was paralyzed? And I said, that was me. And then this woman who I had met for the first time, 15 years after our bus accident, looked at me and said, I prayed for you.
Awesome.
And I thought, how awesome is that?
Yeah.
How awesome for her, who prayed for someone that she never knew, had no intention of meeting, never thought her paths would ever cross. How awesome for her to know that she prayed for someone and got to see the outcome and the benefit and the recipient of her prayers. And how awesome for me, who was not Catholic at the time that this happened, to get to meet someone so many years later who prayed for me and to be able to thank her. That restored my faith in, not that I needed it, reaffirmed my faith in prayer and how powerful it is, and that connection we have that people we've never met, and to know that we can pray for someone and to be able to say, I'm praying for you, or I prayed for you, and to know someone meant it is just really awesome.
Boy, you have a lot of great stories within your story, but that is as powerful and as good a story as there is. That's awesome. Haley, let's go back a couple minutes. You said that some audiences, when you go to talk to, you kind of slip this in there, but you are specifically asked not to mention anything about prayer or your faith.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
I know.
And and how do you do it? Like, just in a minute or two, just how do you slip that in there? Like, by the way, why do they do that, Haley? What part about?
So it's interesting. I spoke at an Episcopal high school once, and they specifically asked me to not try to convert their students to Catholicism, and I just laughed, and I certainly apologize. I said I'm not laughing at you. I would never do that. Faith and religion is so personal to everyone. But that is one where they specifically asked me not to try to convert their students. And then with any sort of business, if I've spoken at many businesses, conventions, or conferences where I've been asked to not evangelize and be any sort of faith evangelist, yes. And so the way I talk about it is not so much of a community of faith, but just being part of a community. And I believe that, for me, being a part of a community of faith is essential to my life. And I don't know how you go through something I did without a very strong community of faith there to lift you up and to nurture you and your family. And to have that community when you need it is to be a part of it when you don't, to give to it, to be that goodness for someone else. And so instead of talking about a community of faith, I talk about a community and whatever that looks like for you. And I may say, you may find your community in your neighborhood or where you work or your children's school, or it might be your church or your synagogue, but having that very strong community in place. So I speak of it as a community and not necessarily a community of faith.
Well, we know you're in trouble and the church is in trouble if you ever go speak to a Catholic audience and they ask you not to mention your Catholic faith.
Well, I am always so grateful when they ask me to include, stories of the power of prayer, and they're my favorite to share because they really are powerful.
Awesome. I'm going to share this with you, and I think you'll think it's pretty neat. You've heard of Vince Lombardi, correct? The great football coach. The Green Bay Packers. And through a friend, there's his grandson is the quarterback's coach for Drew Brees and the New Orleans Saints. And his name is Joe Lombardi, and he's the grandson of Vince. And I called him a few months ago, and I said, and it was crazy because I looked up his number on the New Orleans Saints website, Haley, and I was like, well, of course his admin assistant or the admin assistant's going to answer. The phone picks up, and then he goes, Joe Lombardi. And I was like,
wow.
Yeah. And I was like, wow. And so I said, hey, Dr. John Acquaviva, Joe, I said, we've never met. However, I have this radio show and so forth. And I told him what I do. And I said, I'd like for you to appear on the program, maybe after the season's over, because I know you're so busy now. And the very first thing he said, he goes, but we have to talk about the faith and how important it is to me. And I go, this is Catholic radio, brother. I said, you're free as a bird on that show. But I thought that was neat. And
that is great.
Yeah, that was really good to hear. And it's always good to hear from people in positions of authority, right? Like, because, those are the people, and I think you and people like him, they inspire people as much, if not more than anybody. But Haley, with that, we're going to have to go. But before we do, tell folks where they can contact you or the Speakers Bureau to have you come to their event, their church, conference, whatever the case is, and where they can get a hold of your book, What Though the Odds.
Sure, absolutely. The best place is probably for all of that is my website, which is just haleybook.com, HALEY book.com. My email address is there. They can contact me directly. There's a link to the Speakers Bureau if they'd like to go that route, or they can email me, and there's a link to purchase my book.
Yep.
If anyone wants a signed copy, they can email and ask for that, and I can get that to them as well. But all things on haleybook.com.
Haley, one of the things, and you appeared on the Radio Maria version of this show 2 times. Does that sound familiar? I think you're on more than once, because I was like, you have so much to say. We're going to have you on a second.
Definitely more than once, yeah. It's either 2 or 3.
But, Haley, I couldn't be more sincere about this. The energy that you tell your story, the level of hope, and just the perseverance that just weaves through your words is inspiring. I truly appreciate it, because I cannot imagine the first couple minutes of this interview when I asked you, do a brief overview of your story, how many times you've repeated that part in your words to people, friends and relatives and so forth, or in front of big audiences, and even in your heart. And I thank you so much. But the people, I can guarantee, that were listening today, virtually none of them have heard your story. Thank you for appearing on the program, and thank you for sharing your story.
Well, it is my gift to share, and we all have our gifts, and it's our responsibility to share them. But thank you. I'm truly blessed. Yes,
you are, and I appreciate that comes out in your message, Haley. I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait maybe a year or so, and then when we get some new listeners, and I'll try to have you on again then. So just stay pierced to your email, and maybe I'll send you an email in the near future to come on again.
That sounds great. We will stay in touch.
Thank you, Haley. Take care.
Great. Thank you, John. Have a great day.
You too. Well, how about that? That was terrific. Folks, That was Haley Scott DeMaria. She's the author of the book, What Though the Odds? Check out this story. Talk about a great motivational speaker. The one thing that we did not get to is, I don't know the exact timeline, but not only did she learn to walk again, but she met her personal goal of swimming again by the time she became a senior for the University of Notre Dame. So boy, did she rebound. By the way, again, where you can find out all the information about getting her to speak at an event that you're going to hold, or just getting her book, it's haleybook.com, and Haley is spelled Haley. And Chris, we don't have too much more time in the program. Let's just do this. Let's skip the break today.
Okay.
Yeah, we're going to have, we only have a few more minutes on the show. So let's do this. We'll do our headlines. I'll briefly go through that. We'll do one quick Q&A with Dr. A, and we'll end with our Cathlete of the Week. So before you shoot the question of the week at me, let's talk about the weekend headlines. Last week, the Nationals won the World Series in 7 games. My buddy Tony, remember, he was on a couple weeks ago, and boy, was he way off. He predicted the Nats would win in 6. I said the Astros would win in 7, so in a way, we were both right and we were both wrong. Anyway, the amazing thing about that 7-game series is only the visiting team won that game.
That's right.
So it was amazing. College football. The big game of this past weekend was number 6 UF lost to number 8 UGA. But, boy, we have a huge weekend coming up, including some of the top 10 matchups. Iowa is going to be at Wisconsin, 2 top-ranked teams in the top 25. 2 undefeateds. Penn State is going to be at University of Minnesota. And the big game of the week is number 1 LSU against number 2 Alabama. And I think in the history of the polls, it's happened less than 25 times that during the regular season, 1 has met 2. The other big game, of course, Chris, is Clemson's coming to NC State.
Right.
There you go. All right.
So my Wolfpack better be on their game.
They better be on their game big time. We'll see what happens there. Continuing on with football, the Panthers got by the Tennessee Titans. Now they're 5-3. Next up for the Panthers, though, they're going to be at the Packers. That's going to be a tough match for them.
Yeah,
and we'll see how
there with the cheeseheads.
That's right. They'll be cheeseheading it. In fact, they're going to be mad because they lost a game against the they were a team that they were favored for or against, the Chargers. They ended up losing against them this past weekend. They're going to be mad, those Packers. And it's probably going to be cold. So I think it's going to be like perfect for a recipe, maybe for another Carolina defeat. We'll see.
Yeah.
Your Washington Redskins lost again, Chris. I'm not doing this to rub it in, but I'm just, I'm a sports guy, so I have to share certain stats. They only scored 18 points, Chris, in the last 3 games. And you know what that means? They have scored in a 3-game span the least amount of points in over 12 years. Yeah. That's terrible.
Yeah.
I know.
The only thing you can do is try to look forward to next season and hope we can get a new head coach in there that can turn them around.
That's right. We'll see. The Patriots no longer undefeated as they lost last night to the Ravens. I did not watch to the end of it, but I had to go to bed. Did you watch any of that Sunday night game?
No, I didn't get to see it.
And the whole game, I kept thinking this is quite evenly matched, but I just noticed the Ravens were just outplaying them to the point I was like, this is going to be a 3 or 7 point win for the Ravens. And I think that's exactly what it turned out to be. I think they won by 7. It's a great win. By the way, no more undefeated teams in the NFL now that the Patriots have lost. In the NBA, big news. The only big news I saw coming out in the last few days is Steph Curry is out up to 3 months, wrist surgery. And NCAA basketball, huge week. In fact, it's tomorrow. Number 1, MSU, Michigan State, is against number 2, University of Kentucky. And later on in that tournament, number 3, Duke versus number 4, Kansas. So the top 4 teams are all playing against each other. That's pretty amazing. So if you're a big NCAA basketball fan, tomorrow is your day, Chris.
That's right.
And who do the Wolfpack play tomorrow?
The Wolfpack will be playing Georgia Tech. Going to be a good game.
Okay, I don't know this. Have you looked at any projections for the ACC and where the Wolfpack are going to finish this year?
Not yet. I haven't.
They are due to rebound and then kick those other North Carolina teams in the gut, like Duke and North Carolina. They're just way overdue for a conference championship. It used to be, in fact, the ACC, in particular, North Carolina basketball, was at its greatest when those 3 teams were good.
Right.
We need to have them step up.
I know.
All right, let's do this. I'm going to save, Chris, we don't have enough time to do this, man. We don't have near enough time, and I don't even want to go into it. In fact, I'll tell the folks what the first question was about, and I was ready to answer this question, and it was, what are my thoughts on the NCAA opening the door for college athletes to make money? We just don't have enough time, so let's do this. Why don't you ask the second question, and we'll come back to that first question next week. Fair enough?
Yeah. And the next question has to do with Clemson. Clemson has fallen in the polls. Will they eventually be out altogether, even if they stay undefeated?
I think no. I think Clemson is a team that deserves to be in there as long as they stay undefeated. Now, the big thing is they have not played very well in the last couple of weeks. Or actually, I should say there's been a couple games in this season that they have not played well. Trevor Lawrence was thought to be, I think, the number 1 Heisman Trophy candidate. He's not even in the talking now. He had 5 interceptions, I think, after the first 3 games. I think he has 7 now. That's a lot. Nobody would even consider him. However, we're not talking about Trevor Lawrence and the Heisman. We're talking about Clemson. They started off at number 1. They eventually fell to number 2. In some polls, they're 3 or 4. But they will be in the top 4 for this reason alone. They're going to go undefeated, I think. And if they do, they're going to be in. The other thing is they've already established themselves. My goodness. They won the title last year. 3 years ago in 2016, they won the title. They deserve to be in there. If they go undefeated, granted, the ACC is not very strong. I think ultimately, in fact, it's pretty weak. Do you think by any chance like Wake could beat them in the ACC championship game?
I think it's possible.
Did you watch the NC State Wake Forest game?
Yeah.
Wake is pretty good.
Yeah.
In fact, in the beginning of the year, they said all along that this team's going to be pretty good. They're probably not up to the level, but anything can happen.
Yeah.
My goodness, University of South Carolina beat Georgia a couple weeks ago. If you don't think anything can happen, you haven't watched enough sports, right?
I know.
I mean that. Anyway, so that's that, folks. Clemson, even if they're 5th or 6th in the next couple weeks, they'll work their way back in. And tell the truth, if somebody told me, and fast forwarded a couple months from now, and you told me that they won the national title again, who would be shocked? I certainly wouldn't be. we have a couple minutes left. Thank you, folks, for joining us here for Faith in Sport. We just got a couple minutes left. But one of the things I want you folks to do is do two things. Pass along that there's 3 different ways to listen. AM 1270. Right. You can tap into your local app store and download Carolina Catholic Radio Network app, and then just hit Listen Live. And, Chris, how much does it cost to go to the app store and download that app?
Just a small payment of $19.95. No, I'm just kidding.
Or 3 easy payments of $70.99 for 3 months straight.
Yeah.
No, it's nothing.
Nope, absolutely free.
Chairman Dave Papandrea is... right now he's like, you guys can't even joke about that. We're trying to bring scared squirrels into our programming, into the listenership, and you're scaring them away by talking about there's 3 easy payments of $7.99. And how much does it cost if they go to the CarolinaCatholicRadio.org and hit Listen Live? How much does that cost, Chris?
Absolutely free.
You got another chance to say 3 easy payments of $19.99. Yeah, that's all free, folks. So pass this along. And the other thing I want you to pass along is this show, Faith in Sport. There's got to be people in your life. In fact, there's got to be people on their Christmas list that like Faith in Sport. So one of the things you can do is just give them a card that says Listen Live on Mondays.
That's
Chris,
right.
I should know this by heart, but do you have in front of you when the rebroadcasts of this show are?
No, but I have them memorized.
Oh, let's hear it.
Yeah. You can hear rebroadcast of Faith in Sport tonight at 10 o'clock, and then again tomorrow night at 8 o'clock, and Wednesday night at 11, and Saturdays from 4 to 5, and Sunday afternoons from 2 to 3. So you got plenty of opportunities to hear an encore presentation of Faith in Sport. And, of course, we're always live on Monday afternoons from 2 to 3.
In fact, you're listening live right now. But, of course, when they hear this recording of that, they're going to go, but I'm not really listening to it live. You know what's funny is we're traveling between 2 and 3 yesterday, and I had 3 of my 4 kids in the car. And our show was on, and you were talking, and then Ed and I were talking. And my kids, they're just so used to it now because it's on so often. The rebroadcast, I think they just
tell the truth. You just like listening to yourself that much.
That's right. I think they just flip their wrist at the radio and go, Dad's on the radio again. It's so funny. But at first, it was such a kick because they were like, how's Dad on the radio? And he's sitting there right here driving this minivan. How's that happen? All right, folks, let's get to our Cathlete of the Week. In fact, our Cathlete of the Week is brought to us by Brand RPM. From pens to polos right here in Charlotte. Swag up at brandrpm.com. And every time I say the word swag, Chris giggles.
That's right, because we all know that's how you swag up. If you want to swag up like Dr. A, go to Brand RPM.
There you go. This is our Cathlete of the Week is actually a saint. And one of the reasons I did this is because Ed last week just goes, you got to promote St. Sebastian, who is the patron saint of athletes. So let me read a little bit about St. Sebastian. I think this will motivate everybody. St. Sebastian was born in Narbonne, France. He became a soldier in the Roman army about 283 AD and was known for his physical strength and skill as an archer. Sebastian encouraged others, even under the threat of death, to profess their Catholic faith. Sebastian was named captain of the Praetorian Guards by Emperor Diocletian, not knowing that Sebastian was a Christian. In other words, he wouldn't have given him that title to be the captain of those guards. And when it was discovered during Rome's persecution of the Christians that Sebastian was indeed a Christian, he was ordered executed. He was shot with arrows and left for dead, but when the widow of St. Calstulus went to recover his body, she found he was still alive and nursed him back to health. Soon after, Sebastian intercepted the emperor. Diocletian denounced him for his cruelty to Christians and was beaten to death on the emperor's orders. He is the patron of archers, athletes, and soldiers. He is the patron saint because of his physical endurance, his skill as an archer, and his energetic way of spreading and defending the faith. Sebastian is also credited for numerous converts to the faith. There you have it, our Cathlete of the Week, St. Sebastian. I thought that was a great suggestion from Ed. I hope Ed's listening. In fact, you'll hear his voice. He was the co-host for a long time, and he's going to join us every once in a while. And he was in studio last week, and he goes, John, tell him more about St. Sebastian. So there you have it, the story of St. Sebastian, patron saint of athletes and patron saint of this show. This Cathlete of the Week was brought to you by Brand RPM. Are you ready to swag up? Let Brand RPM outfit your company. Check them out online at brandrpm.com. Chris, that's all we have for today. I want to thank Carlos Herrera for joining us at the beginning of the show for the hit and miss, and Haley Scott DeMaria. Be sure to check out her website at haleybook.com. And I'm Dr. John Acquaviva. Please join us next time here on Carolina Catholic Radio for Faith in Sport.
And make sure that you tune in for an encore presentation of this show at one of the times that I mentioned. Like tonight at 10 o'clock, you can hear an encore presentation of Faith in Sport here on the Carolina Catholic Radio Network, AM 1270 WCGC. Also streaming live at carolinacatholicradio.org and on the Carolina Catholic Radio app. Thank you for tuning in to Faith in Sport, and we'll meet you back here next Monday afternoon for Faith in Sport live from 2 to 3 on the Carolina Catholic Radio Network.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.